Okay, we are going to begin the new Perek Kira, which is which has a lot of the halachos of of if it it has halachos of cooking or preparing food for Shabbos prior to Shabbos. I'm going to share an image of what a kira may have looked like. Essentially, a kira is a oven which is had place of a wood stove. You have a fire in there, and there's a place for two pots that can either sit above if you used it like a stove, or if you wanted to use it more like an oven, the pot that fit in would sit deep into the wood stove, into the oven, and only the ledge of the pot was sitting on the outer side, on the upper side, and resting on the top. So those are the two ways that this was used. And a couple of introductions. We have a concept of that you may be familiar with, of a blech on Shabbos, where you put you cover the heat source of what you're cooking, or what was cooked, with a tin or foil or something else that will cover the heat source of the food and pot that's being serviced. That's the base. The base is going to come from here. But what function that uses is going to be machlokas, and the bulk of the next bit of Gemara. The machlokas is, what are you not allowed to do with an open fire that needs this cover? Are you not allowed to leave something on the stove from prior to Shabbos into Shabbos itself on an open fire? And the basis for that would be because you may end up stoking the fire to increase the temperature and therefore speed up the cooking process. So you have something that is partially or mostly or maybe even fully cooked, and it's 5 minutes before Shabbos. Can I leave it on the stove with the heat source uncovered, and it'll continue to cook into Shabbos? And the problem with that is going to be that maybe you're going to stoke that flame and increase the temperature because you want to speed up the process, because you want the food to be ready. That's called shehiyah, lishos, to leave something in its place on the fire, but it's an open flame. The other opinion is that no, what we're talking about is that's okay. It's cooked, and so therefore it's going to be permissible for you to use that. Or rather, what we're talking about, the question is when you're allowed to return something that was on the flame already at the entrance of Shabbos. And now, so for instance, you have a chicken soup up for Friday night, and you're going to take some out now, but you want some later on in the evening as well, or maybe you want to leave it on for tomorrow. That's called hachazara, to put something back, lahachzir, to put something back on the stove. And that's where you're not allowed to, when you take something off to put it back on the stove, that's where you wouldn't be allowed to do so, because by doing so, you will end up, either it'll look like you're making an initial cooking. You're taking something and initially putting it on the stove, because someone may not have noticed that you had just taken it off. And as a result, they're going to say, oh, you're allowed to put something on the stove on Shabbos. Or not because it's mechzikim avashal, it looks like you're cooking, but again, because you may stoke the flames to reheat it. Those are the two opinions about it. So that's the introduction we need in order to understand the Mishnah. We're also going to need the terms for the various stages of cooking. We saw earlier something is K'machal ben drasai, food that ben drasai, who was a bandit, would eat. Just cooked enough so it's not totally raw, but also not cooked enough to be actually what most people would eat. That's either a third or a halfway cooked, Rashi or the Rambam. And then we have that it is completely cooked, but still it's still good for it to cook a little more. So most people will eat it. It's edible to not only bandits, but to regular people, but a little more time would do it better. So that's mitzdamek. It may actually be diminishing in size, but yafalo, but it's good for it. And then you have mitzdamek viralo. You have it's diminishing, no longer a benefit for it. That's mitzdamek viralo. And then we have, and these terms are for something, for what we call bishel kol tzarka. It's completely cooked, but the two stages are completely cooked, but and beneficial for it to continue cooking, or completely cooked and no longer beneficial for it cooking. Yes, I see the hand up. Michael, what's the question?
The Gemara seems to be talking about here different aspects of cooking or covering the flame or not covering the flame. But in the previous parak, we saw that Beis Shammai said you can't use your kalim on Shabbos. Your kalim have to rest on Shabbos. Why isn't that the problem? Why wouldn't that be the problem for Beis Shammai in general? That you can't cook on Shabbos because you can't use a pot on Shabbos. You're using your pot.
My pot's not doing anything. My pot is resting. A mill, my vessel is doing something. This is not a shvisas kli per se, although that question is discussed. This isn't the simple answer. The basic answer is this is not a shvisas kli. Everything is resting. It's being done inside. I'm doing something. I'm utilizing the space inside those vessels. This is not the place to deal with Beis Shammai and shvisas kli, but that's the basic answer. So let's get to the Mishnah. Kira, this two pot stove, and we'll see that there are other ovens as well. There was a cone shape, the upside down cone shape, which is called a tanur, and it had place for one, and that had a higher degree of temperature because of the cone shape. But what we're talking about is a kira, which is a rectangular two stove, a two pot stove. So kira shesikur bekasha begavama. If the heat source that you're using is straw or stubble, which burn themselves up very quickly, then you're allowed to put a cooked item onto it, or a cooking item onto it. Now, what the Gemara is going to struggle with is nosnim. Does that mean the initial placement or returning? However, but if you're using sediment from your wine press or your olive press, which makes for very good long-lasting fuel, or you're using wood, which makes for long-lasting fuel, then you cannot put it on, and again, either initially or returning, until you either rake it out, or if you cover it with fresh, with ash, which according to Rashi diminishes the temperature, so you're cooling it. According to most Rishonim in Iran and according to Halacha, it's because it serves as a reminder, a heker, that, don't stoke the flames. You have to either rake out the coals or cover them, and then you're allowed to either initially put it on or return. Beis Shammai armin chamin avalet tavshel. Beis Shammai say, and all this would only be in hot water, but not a cooked food. No, either way, cooked food or hot water. Beis Shammai armin noitlin avalet machzir. You can remove it, but you can't put it back. Beis Hillel say you can even return it. Now, the Gemara is going to say, if the end is talking about returning, So then the initial statement in the Mishnah would seem to be talking about only talking about the initial placement. And then the question would be whether you're allowed to have kept it there on Shabbos or not. So the Gemara starts off with this question from the get-go. The question is asked, when the Mishnah at the beginning says lo yite, you should not put your pot onto the stove unless you rake out or cover the coals. Lo yachzirhu, does that mean don't do hachzara, don't return it? Oh, avol lishos, but to keep the pot there from before Shabbos and let it stay on, even though your heat source is open and going strong, mashin, that you're allowed to do, you're allowed to leave it there. Alpha pisha ina garv ina katam, even though you have not covered the coals and you have not raked them out. Umani, and whose opinion would that be? Chananya. This would be the opinion of Chananya, who we saw earlier in the previous parak. And he says, the Tanya, we learned Chananya omer kol shuka macha ben drusai. Chananya says anything that's already cooked, partially, a third way, halfway, but the term is ben drusai, macha ben drusai, like food that ben drusai, the bandit, would eat. Mutalish hoso al gabi kira, you're allowed to do shahiyah on the kiri, allowed to keep it there from before Shabbos and let it continue cooking on the open flame. Alpha pisha ena garavena katam, even though that the heat source is not covered and not raked out, or raked out and covered in this order. Or perhaps, no, this is not the opinion of Hananya, rather it's the other opinion. And when it says in the Mishnah, lo yitain, that you should not put it on, lishos tanan, what it's talking about is you're not allowed to leave it there from before Shabbos. Igar of in Iloila, if you did rake out or cover the heat source, the fire, the coals, then you're allowed to leave the pot on there from before Shabbos and continue cooking into Shabbos. But if you didn't, you may not. The kol shakein lahachzir, and for sure, once if you did leave it there and you took it off the flame, you couldn't put it back on if you don't have a covered heat source, or if you haven't raked it out. So that's the question over here. This that we say, you're not allowed to put it onto a active stove. Does that mean you can't return it? But you could, once it's cooked, you're allowed to leave it there from Friday afternoon into Shabbos? Or no, we're talking about you're not allowed to leave it there. For sure, you're not allowed to put it back. And those terms, again, are shehiyah and hachazara. Shehiyah being leaving it there. Hachazara is lahachzir, to return it there. Or lishos and lahachzir, to let it rest, let it continue there, keep it there, or to put it back. So we're going to try and prove what our Mishnah's discussion is. Tashama, come in here. Midiktani tri bavi b'masnitin. Our Mishnah has two statements, phrases, statements in regards to the machlokas b'shama and b'shil. B'shama yomrin chamin avalei tavshil. You can put back hot water, but not put back. You can place hot water, but you cannot place cooked items. And Mesil say you can place both hot water and cooked options. And then another statement, Bishama say you can take it off, but you cannot put it back on. Mesil say you could put it back on. Now, if the first statement is talking about you may not leave it there before Shabbos and continue its cooking process if the heat source is not covered or removed. So then it makes sense. If your heat source is a diminishing heat source, such as straw, which is just going to burn out pretty quickly, then you're allowed to leave it there from before Shabbos and to continue its cooking process. Tavshil, a cooked object. The gefas of a beitzim, if your heat source is something that's that retains its fuel, such as sediment and wood, which is going to continue to have fuel into Shabbos. Lo yeshe. You're not allowed to leave something from before Shabbos and continue cooking the cooking process into Shabbos, until you rake it out, or until you cover it with ash. And what is this? What are you allowed to keep on the uncovered stubble and straw, which burns itself out? Beshame omrin chamin. Beshame say hot water. Avalutavshel, but not a cooked item. Besilim chamin and tavshel. Besilim say that both the cooked item, or water. Now the Gemara continues. It says the pligi belishos, pligi nami belachzir. And then the Mishnah is going to tell us that just as they have a machlokes, whether you're allowed to initially, before Shabbos, leave a cooking item on the stove, even in stubble, they ask the same machlokes is going to be in regards to whether you're allowed to put it back or not. B'Shamai say you can remove it, but you can't put it back on. B'Sil say you're allowed to put it back on if it's stubble or if it is a covered source. So then the Mishnah all works very well. However, if the question is not in regards to leaving it there, but in hachzara, in putting it back on the stove, so the Mishnah is going to read like this: an oven, a wood stove that you used a burning up fuel that's going to burn itself up, such as straw. Machzirin allow tafshel. You can even put food back on. So it was there from the beginning of Shabbos, and now I took it off to take some out, and I'm going to put it back on the stove. You're allowed to do that because the heat source is diminishing. The gefes of eitzim. However, if you used proper fuel, such as grape sediment or wood, lo yachzir. You're not allowed to return it back on when you took it off, unless you've already, prior to Shabbos, raked out the coals or covered it with some ash. And then Beshame say, what are you allowed to put back? Beshame or mechamen avalav tavshil. Beshame say you're allowed to put back hot water, but not a cooked item. Besiloim mechamen betavshil. Miss Hill will say you're allowed to even put back the cooked item. But the next line would make no sense. Beshame say you could take it off, but you can't put it back on. What's that adding? You're interpreting in the first line in the Mishnah already to mean that you can take it off, but you can't put it back on. So what would this additional line in the last line in the Mishnah mean? Hasul amali. So what's that adding to us? So the Gemara says in Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph, we go to the next Amid. In reality, of course, what we're talking about is whether you're allowed to return it back onto the flame or not. And it's missing a line in the Mishnah which would help the flow. And this is what it means. If it has a diminishing heat source, you're allowed to return the pot back onto the fire. The gefes eitzim, however, if it has a proper heat source, such as grape sediment or wine or olive press sediment and wine and wood, lo yachzir. You may not put it back because that's a good heat source, and you can't put it back until you have raked it out prior to Shabbos, or until you put the ash on it. Avalishos, but to keep it on before Shabbos, mashin, that you're allowed to have kept it on from the beginning. Alpha pisha even if you have not covered the heat source, if you not removed the heat source, you're allowed to leave something that's cooking from prior to Shabbos as long as it's already cooked kamacha ben rasai, as long as it's already got the initial stage of cooking done, half, third. Then you can keep it on before Shabbos and let it continue its cooking process into Shabbos. Alpha pisha even if the heat source is not covered or removed. Umahin mashin. And what are you allowed to keep before Shabbos? B'shami omrechamin avalitavshil, misaloi mechamin betavshil. You're allowed to, according to Bishama, keep only hot water, and according to Hillel, even cooked foods. And this that we said that you're allowed to return it to its source if it's stubble and straw, or if it's covered, is only according to Beis Hillel. But Beis Shammai say you can never return it regardless. So the Mishnah, again, just to review, the Mishnah starts off and says, don't put something on an open heat source. Maybe you're going to stoke the flames unless you've removed the heat source, or if you've covered it. And then the last line says you're not allowed. Beis Shammai say you're not allowed to put it back. Beis Hillel say you're allowed to put it back. We're trying to identify the first line in the Mishnah, and we say if it makes most sense to say it means don't leave it there from before Shabbos, and if you did, you can remove it, but you cannot put it back. And Beis Shammai say you can even put it back as long as the heat source is covered, or it's a weak heat source that's diminishing, like straw. That's the simplest reading of the Mishnah. The Gemara says, no, we can even read it according to Hananiah. And this, the Hananiah says that you can, once it's cooked partially, like Machaber and Nasai, you're allowed to have left it there from before Shabbos, even on an open heat source. That would fit with our Mishnah. And the meaning of our Mishnah is like this. You're even allowed to put it, when it says don't put it back, what it means is don't put it back unless you have a covered heat source. And Beis Shammai say even with a covered heat source, you're not allowed to put it back, to which Beis Hillel say you're allowed to. And that's the first and last line in the Mishnah. The first line, it's again talking about hachazara, returning the food on there. So you're allowed to have left it there from the beginning of Shabbos, once it's cooked, kamacha ben derusayim. However, once you've taken it off, you cannot put it back on unless you've removed the heat source or you've covered the heat source. And then the last line tells us, and even that, Beis Shammai disagree and say you can only put on water, you cannot put and not return it. And Beis Hillel say, not only are you allowed to have put back water, cooked food, but you're allowed to put it back in when it is a covered heat source. You're allowed to put it back. Tosa says a couple of points that are important. One, what we see is that the wording in the Mishnah is unless you are going to remove rake out the coals. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to rake out the coals on Shabbos, even though even though that it seems that the Mishnah is giving you a remedy. Tosus asks, you can't do that on Shabbos. So Tosus gives an answer, but we're going to go with the Ran's answer, which is no. What we're talking about is what it means is if you planned it properly and you will have removed it. But of course, on Shabbos you're not allowed to remove it. The other point that Tosus makes is our Gemara is really going to lengths to try and fit our Mishnah with the opinion of Hananiah. The simple reading the Mishnah, the Gemara could have left, is that the Mishnah is going with the Chachamim, not Hananiah. And they're the majority. So why are we working so hard to try and fit the Mishnah with the opinion of Hananiah that the first line in the Mishnah says, you shall not place the food on the stove unless the heat source is removed or covered? Why are we trying to fit that to mean lahachzir in returning the food? This it says because Allah is like Hananiah. The reason is because indeed we follow that opinion. Now, even though the Shulchan Aruch does not go with this, the Ramah for Ashkenazim does go with this at least in a time of need. And that would be the halacha that if you forgot to cover your stove, you can still continue allowing the food to cook. And we don't follow the opinion that you're not allowed to have something continue cooking on an open flame on Shabbos or in various types of pots that you can't cover the heat source. For Ashkenazim, we follow the opinion of Tosus and Rashi really on the Amud base as well, who says that the halacha is like Hananiah. Tashema, we're going to continue trying to prove this machlokes between Hanania and the Chachamim. Again, the basis is Hanania says something that's cooked at least partially, like Maicha ben Rosai, is allowed to remain on an open heat source on a kira, on this double oven, a double stove. And the only question is whether once you removed it, if you're allowed to put it back on the stove, that would have to be where the heat source is covered or you've shoveled it out. And the Chachamim say, no, for sure you're not allowed to return it. The question is if you're even allowed to just leave it on an open heat source from before Shabbos to continue cooking. Tashema, the Amar Rabbi Chelba, Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Guria, Amar Rav, Lashana Ella Al Gaba. Our Mishnah said that in a kira that you're allowed to put the pot, which we're discussing whether you're allowed to put it before Shabbos and let it continue cooking, or on Shabbos you're allowed to return it. It says on top of the kira, which as we showed in that image, it has a hole where there's a double function in how to use a kira. You can either put the pot into these holes and let the entirety of the pot be surrounded by your heat source, and only the lip of the pot is hanging over the outer edge and keeping the pot above the stove. Or you have a pot that's wider than the hole, and it would sit entirely above. So think crock pots that have an insert that go in, or a rice cooker, or an Instapot. All these pots that have an insert that go entirely inside the heating source. So that would be inside the oven. And what we're talking about is like our typical stoves where the pot sits entirely above the stove. So our Mishnah is only talking about if the pot is sitting on top of the stove. But if it's hanging into the oven, also it's going to be prohibited. Now, if our Mishnah is talking about returning it, it makes sense. In our Mishnah, there's going to be a distinction between the pot sitting above or the pot hanging in. But if the concept in our Mishnah is that it's cooking on its own, and it's a question of leaving it from before Shabbos to continue cooking into Shabbos, mali tocha mali al gaba. Why would there be a distinction between whether it's inside or not? After all, either way, you have to have removed or covered the heat source. And so who cares if it's inside or not? In Hanania's opinion, where you're allowed to leave something on the heat source, now, an open heat source, so it makes sense. You're only allowed to leave it and return it onto a cover when it's sitting on top. But if either way, even to just leave it from before Shabbos, you have to have removed the heat source. So what distinction would there be from above or in? Either way, I've removed the heat source or covered it. So Gemara says, well, you think he's addressing the first line in the Mishnah, so you have a good question. You're right, he's only talking about the end of the Mishnah. On this, that Beis Hillel say that once you've removed the heat source, you're even allowed to return it. To that he says, that he says, you're allowed to return it, but only on top, but not in. So indeed, to leave it from before Shabbos, you're allowed to leave it even where it's hanging into the stove, into the oven, and the reason is because you've removed the heat source. However, in returning it, you can only put it back on to the top, but not into it, because that looks more like you are cooking initially.
That's on an uncovered heat source or any heat source.
To return it, lahachzir is only on a covered heat source. Can never return it to an uncovered heat source. So it has to be covered. But nevertheless, you can't put it where it's hanging in. Sorry?
You think for us, we couldn't put a crock pot back in the sleeve.
That's what this would seem to be saying. Correct.
Right.
Right. Tashema. So we're going to try and prove it again. Base kiros. So you have this double stove, hamas imos, which are connected to each other. However, there is between the heat chambers, between the fire chambers, there's a earthenware wall between them. Achas gerufa v'achas ketuma. So you have this double stove, a double oven, side by side. They're connected to each other. One still has an open source and of fire, so it's got a fire going. The other one does not. She'ena gerufa v'ena ketuma mashan al gaba. The one that you've not removed the heat source, you can leave a pot on top of it. Gerufa ketuma. Sorry again. Let me read it. Base kiros amativas achas gerufa ketuma v'achas she'ena gerufa ketuma. One is covered, one's not. Mashan al gabi grufa ketuma, ve'in mashan al gabi she'ena grufa ketuma. The one that is the one that has a removed or covered heat source, you're allowed to keep a pot on top of, and the one that has an uncovered heat source, you're not allowed to leave a pot on top of. Omahin mashin. And what are you allowed to keep on the covered and or removed heat source? Bishama said you can't keep anything on it. And Basil say you're allowed to keep hot water, but you're not allowed to keep food. Akar. However, once you remove the pot, everybody says you're not allowed to return the pot there. Rabbi Meir. So this is the version of Rabbi Meir in the Machlokas Bisham Basil. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. However, Rabbi Yehuda says Beishame Omrin Chamin Avalotavshil. Beishame say you could keep hot water there, you just can't keep a cooking food there. And Basil say that you can keep hot water there as well as a cooked food. And Beishamai say you can take it off the hot water, but you can't put it back on. And Basil say you can even put it back on. Now, so for our Mishnah, also is talking about leaving food there from before Shabbos. So that would fit at least Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa, because Rabbi Yehuda because it's explicitly talking about leaving something from before Shabbos, as it says mashin, leaving something from before Shabbos, and the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is whether there is any Beishamai allow anything and Beis Hillel allow even food, but we're all talking about a covered source, and then you're going to be allowed to, according to Beishamai, leave hot water, and according to Beis Hillel, leave even food, and then our Mishnah fits with Rabbi Yehuda. Masnita Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah would be Rabbi Yehuda. Eli Amos lahachzir tuna. However, if our Mishnah, like you're trying to say, really is talking about leaving food from before Shabbos, you could leave it even on an open source of heat. And the only question on our Mishnah is, once you removed it, lahachzir tuna, are you allowed to put it back? So masnitin mani. So whose opinion is our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah is also bringing the machlokas of Beishamai Beis Hillel, but it wouldn't fit with either of these two opinions, not with Rabbi Meir and not with Rabbi Yehuda, because both of them are saying that even Beishamai prohibits leaving the food on an open source of heat. Rabbi Meir, because if you're going to say our Mishnah is in concurrence with Rabbi Meir, Kashil Beishamai b'Chodel Beisil v'Tarti, it'll contradict Beishamai in one aspect and Beis Hillel in two. If Rabbi Yehuda, Kasha Grufa Ktuma, and if it's Rabbi Yehuda, it'll contradict in the sense that it has to be, in our Mishnah, it says it can even be an open source, and according to Beis Hillel, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the Brisa, that it would have to be talking about a covered or shoveled out heat source. So Gemara says, no, I can fit and say in our Mishnah is talking about whether a food that is already cooked initially is allowed to be kept on the stove, and then you removed it and putting it back. So it's about hachazara. Otana didan, and our Mishnah savar la Rabbi Yehuda b'chada palagale b'chada. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in one aspect, that Beishamai Beis Hillel are only talking about cooked foods, but they both agree in regards to water, hot water. But he disagrees with him on one aspect. this that he said that Beis Shammai, that Beis Hillel only allows it in a covered source. He says that no, leaving it on a covered source. He says no, you can even leave it on an uncovered source. So like Rabbi Yehuda in regards to machlokas of hot water and cooked foods, he follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that indeed that Beis Shammai even allow cooking water, and Beis Hillel say not only water but even cooked foods. And you can take it and put it back. But he disagrees with one aspect: not only allowed to leave it there and take it off and put it back, according to Beis Hillel, but even you're allowed to leave it on an open source, and only the returning requires that it'll have been covered. The ilutana they done savar lishos, because our Mishnah says you can even leave it there from prior to Shabbos as long as the heat source is covered. Rabbi Yehuda savar belishos nami garvakatim in iloila. However, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say even to leave it on the source is going to need that the heat source is covered. So again, we have a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda disagree as to how strict Beis Shammai is and how lenient Beis Hillel are going to be. That the wording of the Brisa says it will not fit with our interpretation of the Mishnah according to Hananya. The Gemara says, no, you're right, it doesn't fit. And our Tana is going to, our Mishnah is going to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda in the one aspect. Because indeed, our Mishnah holds that you can leave something before Shabbos on the stove, even on an open heat source, and you only need the covered heat source, according to Beis Hillel, to be allowed to return the food. But if you have never taken it off from before Shabbos, as long as it's on the stove the entire time, it can continue cooking even on an open heat source. Ibayluhu. Gemara asks a question. Mau lismoich. Okay, so I can't put it back onto an open heat source. If you have you've not shoveled out your coals, or you've not covered your coals, so I can't put it into the oven. I can't put it on the oven. Could I put it on the outside? And these were earthenware ovens. The outside is pretty hot. Can I put my pot next to the outside and it'll reheat itself or cook in as much as it's getting heat from the outside of the pot, from the side? Tocha v'gaba aser. Do we only say that in it or on top of it is prohibited? Aval lismach b'shaper dummy, but to put it on the side would be okay. Or dilma lishna, or perhaps there's no distinction. Toshaman. So we're going to try and prove it from the previous brisa, which said shtei kiros hamasimas hachas gruv v'achas ktuma. I have a double oven side by side, and there's a wall between the one stove and the other. And in one, the heat source is still open. I have a burning fire in the one. Achas grufa ktuma. In the other, one of them I've either shoveled out or covered the heat source. And one is not covered or shoveled out. Mashin al gabi grufa ktuma. So then you can leave it and it can continue cooking on the one that's uncovered. Sorry, the one that's you've shoveled out or covered. Even though that it's essentially on the side of the one that has an uncovered heat source. So what's our question? Our question is, can I leave it? Can I put it on the side of my pot, side of my oven? So the question was whether I can put a pot over here on the outside of the oven, to which this case is talking about that we have a double oven with a wall between them. One of them has an open heat source. One of them, I've either removed the fire, the wood, or I've covered it. And I'm allowed to put it on the one that no longer has an open heat source, even though that it is right next to and getting heat from the one that has the wood still in it. So that would indicate that I'm allowed to put my pot
from the side that's uncovered. In other words, he puts the pot against the wall where the fire is uncovered. Is that the issue, or
correct?
Either side.
Correct.
Okay.
So Gemara says, "Shani hasam kivan the midalye shalit ba'avir." Says no. There it's different because the pot is sitting on top of the stove, so therefore the cold air around the oven is hitting the pot, and so it's not so concerning. But if you put it down on the ground on the side of the oven, there it is protected in a certain sense by the oven itself, and maybe that's going to cook it more and prohibit. If you actually cover the heat, so you took some ash and you put it on top of your coals, on top of your wood, to diminish the flame of the fire, either to remind you not to stoke it, as the Ran says, or as Rashi says, because that cools down the oven, and but then the fire flared up again. Samchala, you're allowed to lean a pot on the side of it, and you can leave it on top of it. You're allowed to remove it and put it back. So even though we said that you can only put it back if it has a covered heat source, since you covered it, even though that now that cover is essentially blown off because it flared up, you're allowed to still put it back. So we see that you're even allowed to lean a pot on the side of the oven. However, only katma, if you first did ketuma, you first covered the heat source with coals. Obviously, if you raked it out, even more so. But loy katma. But if you never did anything to diminish the flame, to cover the flame, loy, you're not allowed to lean a pot on the side. Well, Tamer, Gemara says, according to your logic, you can only take it off if it's covered, but you cannot take the pot off if it's not covered. Yeah, is that really true? That can't be. I can take it off even if it's an uncovered heat source. What you're going to say is that I can take it off. What it means is I can take it off and put it back. And I'm just saying the concept of not taking it off, meaning I can't take it off and put it back. Leaning it on the side also is not being exacting. The Tana was using terms freely, but really what he's trying to say is that you can't leave it there and you can't return it there. But you can lean it on the side of the pot and you can even take it off the pot, off the stove. The Gemara says, no, that doesn't make sense. There, to take it off and put it back is all talking about the same place. So it makes sense to say you can take it off and put it back, or you cannot take it off and put it back. So it makes sense that Agav, that once he's mentioning putting it back, he says you can take it off and put it back, or cannot take it off and put it back, and the not taking off is really not the halacha. You can take it off, you just can't put it back. But you can't say really he means you can't leave it, you can't lean it, or you can't leave it, but he just said one for the other. They're in different places. Leaning it is on the side of the oven. Placing it there and leaving it there is on the top of the oven. So they're two different things. So if he mentions them both would be prohibited unless it is a covered heat source. So my halacha. So what is actually the halacha? How does halacha deal with this? Tashema, so we're going to try and prove it from this brisa. Kira shasikua begefas be'etzim. If you use the proper heat source, such as wood and a sediment, which are good fuel, you're allowed to lean it on the side. However, you're not allowed to leave it on the top. Elim came grufak tuma unless the heat source has been shoveled out or is covered. Coals that have begun to die out, or you put some flax or something on it, that counts like you've covered it and it's sufficient cover, and therefore you're allowed to leave it on the stove itself. Tomorrow morning, Bez Hashem, we'll continue with the continuation of the sugya of leaving food on an open heat source or a covered heat source from Friday into Shabbos.